Greetings, everyone. Welcome to our exclusive Global Leading Voices webinar campaign. We are delighted to have you join us here today. Please be informed that if you have any questions during the presentation, you may type them into the question box in your control panel. The presenter will answer your questions at the end of the presentation accordingly. Now, without further ado, we will turn the time.
Oh, I think we're live, right?
Yes.
Hello and welcome to our webinar today, made possible by PECB. We have Aiken, Lucas, and myself with us today. We want to talk a bit about ISO IEC 27032 and how it can help with cybersecurity. Let's have a look at the agenda. We're going to talk about AI and privacy. So I'm going to take the first part of the presentation. I'm going to talk a little bit about my experiences in the field and talk a little bit about privacy and law and how law and standardization come close together. Then we're going to hear a bit more about generative AI models and security. The second part is done by Lucas, if I'm not mistaken.
Aiken will be the second part.
Aiken will be the second part, sorry. And then the third part, AI and ISO 27032 from Lucas. On the next slide, we're gonna introduce ourselves. So, Arno, first, I wanted to tell you a bit about some new PECB events that are happening, and Vesa can tell us what those are going to be about.
Yes, thanks, Christian. Okay, the next PCB events will be the PCB conference, which is organized in person 4-5 of October, which will be regarding information technology, security, and privacy. And you'll get more information there in Paris, so you can go ahead and grab your tickets. Also on 18 and 19 of September, we'll have the online Chief Information Security Officer and his Directive 2.0 training courses, as well as in-person at the PCB Insights Conference in Paris, France on 2 and 3 of October. So you can purchase your tickets in the below link as well. I'll also send the links via the chat box so that you can access them. Thanks a lot. You can go ahead with the presentation.
Thank you, Vesa, so much for this information. So now I would like our speakers to introduce ourselves. So Aiken, may you start? I do the finish when I start with my part of the presentation.
Okay, good day, everybody. My name is Aiken Johnson. I'm a cybersecurity expert. Well over 15 years experience in the cybersecurity space. I've done a lot of technology improvement and then seen a lot of technology involvement over the years. I'm a DevSecOps professional. I'm also a cloud security expert, as much as an generative AI security professional. All right, I think I'll give the rest to Lucas for the next introduction.
Okay, perfect. Thank you, Aiken. Thanks all for being here. I'm just going to do a brief introduction. I'm Lucas. I'm currently a manager in PwC Cybersecurity and Privacy team. I also represent Argentina and Malta within the ISO subcommittee 27. That's where all the ISOs that start in 27 are being created, drafted, and discussed within experts. And that's the main drafts. And for my profile, I'm more focused on the GRC, governance, risk, and compliance kind of niche within cybersecurity. And I will bring you a few insights on the new edition of the ISO 27032.
Thank you so much, Lucas. Thank you so much, Aiken. My name is Christian Grafenauer. I'm a consumer representative on behalf of the DIN in the ISO committees for blockchain. I'm also researching independently on the crossroads of law and technology. I'm going to talk a bit today about how privacy looks from a consumer perspective and how the international or European landscape in our case is structured and organized, and how the connection between law and standards constitutes itself and why it is important. So, and I directly would like to start with that. Next slide, please. So not just one slide, we're just looking at the upper part for now. So from a consumer perspective, privacy is pretty easy. So you have companies that are producing goods and services. Of course, you have a little bit of freedom through your choice. Do I choose product A or product B? But that's basically where laws come in place, because law guarantee consumers a certain minimal standard. On the next slide, we can see that this basically leads to a more complex infrastructure of associations and laws in the middle that basically dictate how our technology is built, what properties certain products and services have. So on the right side, rather industry-oriented, is the CEN and the ISO. So those are standardization organizations that make standards. So and this particular tool is now being used by the legislative, as we see it in the AI Act. I'm going to talk about this a bit later. But basically, from the consumer side, what is still required is that basically you need organizations, so like ANEC, which is the European Consumer Representation Organization, and the DIN also has a sub-chapter which is taking care of consumer rights, and those basically join the committees in CEN and ISO that standardize the products that we're using. Next slide, please. So here we see how this is working in practice. So basically the lawgivers say, hey, at some point the technology is too complicated to make all the regulation directly in a law. So they basically may do a standardization request at the CEN or at the ISO to develop more concrete guidelines and rules how to make a technology that is in conformity to the law. So what the legislative is also doing is also requesting or hopefully ensuring that consumer representation organizations like ANEC and DIN are joining this process and are sufficiently involved in this process. So this is actually one of the research topics I'm currently working on. How can consumer representation be more effective, more impactful, and also thinking on the side, how can you drive actual business value through good consumer representation and respecting consumer interests. Next slide, please. So to illustrate that, I have taken a quote from the currently highly discussed AI Act. And if we look on the last part of the sentence, which we see on the next slide, we see that AI systems that conform to the new harmonized EU standards currently under development would benefit from a presumption of conformity with the draft AI requirements. So this basically means, concretely, one more slide, please. That what is happening here is that basically the AI Act is a law in itself, which is basically providing the general guidelines, what you have to do to be compliant to the AI Act. But they are also requesting the CEN, so the European Standardization Organization, to add additional standards, more technical standards to AI, to have complete compliance rules that companies and users of AI turn to when they want to figure out what do I need to do to make my due diligence to have a lawful and an ethically integrated product. So this is one example for how standardization is influencing the process of law giving. Now to the next slide, please. I also want to show how there is a second reference to standardization hidden in the AI text, which is in the first half, the cybersecurity part. If you go to the next slide. So, for example, for cybersecurity, there is a special committee, the SC27, which is also the one that released the ISO standard that we're talking more about today. And I also wanted to point out that in the AI Act, there is also stated the need to conform with highly standards and to regularly do a post-market monitoring. And there I also just wanted to point towards a research paper that I've done in the past, which basically allows us to do such monitoring of post-market data if a product falls in the high risk category. Next slide, please. Assessments like these and certification and is particularly complying with standardization is mentioned in the law, particularly as the presumption of conformity to the AI Act, and we'll probably see this in further directives as well. And excuse me. And anonymization, for example, is also a great privacy-enhancing technology to protect the rights of users and freedoms. And something like this will be particularly required by high-risk AI systems. There are other aspects to look at, but we'll learn more from our next presenters where that goes. And with the next slide, I want to say thank you for your attention. I'm also currently looking for projects to get involved where I can bring my knowledge about standardization and AI and technology stuff to good use. So if you found my presentation interesting and would like to get in touch, please get in touch. And I want to give over to the next presenter, Aiken.
All right, thank you very much, Christian, and it's a pleasure to be having this presentation right now. Okay, so yeah, we're talking about generative AI, what it is, the models and uses. We look at what could go wrong, and then we can patent methodologies, and then we can actually talk about the recommendations that we have, and like in conformity with ISO 27032 standard. All right, Lucas, can I see like this next slide? All right, so generative AI, we have to know before we actually look at conformity, we should also know what generative AI is. Generative AI is a type of artificial intelligence that can produce content such as audio, text, codes, like project software codes, videos, images, and all that type of data, be it in the health sector, in whatever industry that is very relevant. And over time, generative AI is also a type of machine learning, which at its core works by training software models to make predictions based on data without a need for explicit programming. That means we're using artificial intelligence, to train artificial intelligence to look at different levels of data, and then you don't actually have to, we call it a code reusability, and then without the need of explicit programming time and time again. All right, next slide, please. All right, so a brief history. I think we all have access to some of these histories, but it's just worthy to mention what a brief history of generative AI is about, and then how we can actually use what has been to improve what we're working on, and then the next evolvement of generative AI. We'll look at artificial intelligence as a surprising long history with the concept of thinking machines traceable back to ancient Greece, and the modern AI really kicked off in the 1950s. We've seen different evolving in the industry of generative AI. We talk about the first neural networks that were capable of being trained were invented in 1997, and then we've seen the further development uh, within the use of AI throughout the 1980s, and then even in 2014, a type of algorithm called the generative adversarial network was created, enabling generative AI applications like images, videos, and audio. I think I'll dwell more about this later in the slide. Okay, Lucas. All right. Like I said, generative adversarial networks are best for image duplication and then synthetic data generation. We have different models that are done for image duplication, synthetic data generation. That is, we have the unreal data. It's actually not new to this. I think I can mention a few, but because this is more like we're talking about the conformity into ISO 27030 standard, which is has been revised of recent. So I would like to look at the concept context of why we're here. So the transformer-based models, which are best for text generation, context and code generative, which is also pre-trained transformer technology, and they have the bidirectional encoder representations for transformers. We have different ones by different companies and product developers. Okay, we have a lot of this list, and then I'll just like to go through more about what we have today. Lucas, can I have just the next slide? All right, we have the multimodal language, and then we have the LLMs, which are the large language models, which is what is very popular and well known today, and everybody wants to use the large language model, which is trained either with good data or without good data. So we also have the neural radiance field, which is the emerging neural network technology that we use to generate 3D imagery based on 2D imaging fields. There's some where you can actually have a picture, excuse me, there's some in which you have a picture of 2D and then translate to a 3D image for you within a twinkle of an eye. These are always, these are things that are involved within the generative AI methodologies. And then we have in cybersecurity, we talk about zero trust analysis, and we also talk about new technologies metrics. So these new tools bring extended capabilities, and we should not forget that as professionals in our field of expertise, it will also introduce new threats, and then the vulnerabilities will also ensure. Okay, next slide, please. All right. Before we even look at some of the vulnerabilities that might exist, it's also worthy to note that for every industry that is trying to implement AI technology, we have to also look at the industry readiness. Whatever industry with health, software technology, IT, telecoms, regardless of the industry, we also look at the industry readiness, and then the industry readiness can actually help us with standards and then, of course, best practices within each industry to help us indicate what kind of generative AI we should actually put into consideration before embarking on implementing any kind of generative AI. I would like to just mention rise of generative AI have led to greater security concerns. According to research with Grammarly and Forrester, most companies still don't have a clear strategy to deploy their generative AI within their organizations at scale. Some organizations and enterprises are implementing generative AI within their day-to-day activities, but looking at a lot of their involvement and then a lot of the implementation guidelines, they still don't have a clear strategy on the actual use and then the best practice to use. So, according to reports, generative AI is a critical and important priority. Yes, by 2025, nearly all 97% will be using the technology to support communication. All those like security concerns. Yes, AI can actually automate some of our security and identity and event monitoring, but it doesn't mean that there's a strategy at hand that has been quest with conform standards and things that should be put in place, just like the ISO 27030 cybersecurity standard in the day-to-day activities of addressing internet security issues and common threats that will be attached to this technology. Next slide, please. All right. I believe we are all not new to generative AI, and then we have different examples of uses. And then a lot of them might have used different technologies like Google, Microsoft, OpenAI, and different all of that kind of GPTs out there, all of the language models, such as for videos, for images, for text, for audios, for code generation, such as Copilot. We also have data augmentation and other use cases within different environments. Next slide. All right. Just as we're professionals, it is always worthy to note that the first thing we look at is no matter how good the technology is, we should also look at what could actually go wrong. The first thing we look at is privacy and security, just like President mentioned while he was making his presentation. He talked about conformity, he talked about consumer, and then of course we talk about consumers and providers. But I'm sure Lucas will tell us what has actually transpired between 2032, 2012, and 2032, 2023, which has even like is more robust and talks more about stakeholders than just providers and then consumers. All right. The next thing that could actually go on is undetected bias. A lot of generative AI that has been implemented over time, as most of this in excuse me, they have this in some of their errors, and then one of the functionalities that there's a bias to it, and we'll get to know that pretty soon. And then we have the model malfunction, we have copyright and intellectual property, and then we also have the hallucination, which is most important data inaccuracy. Next slide, please. Right. What could go wrong? Yes, the first is data privacy and security. A lot can go wrong here if the proper data protection measures aren't taken, and then the company will need to have the right security infrastructure in place, having different standards and then best practices, and then we have what we call multi framework technology within security. And then when we talk about bias, we talk about aggregation bias, algorithm bias, society bias, and we have cognitive biases, and then we have incomplete data kind of bias. Like I'll explain that in the next slide. And then we can also have what we call a machine function, which is about model function. Okay. All right. Who wants to generate content? Yes. This also what could go wrong. Copyright and intellectual property is a thing of concern when the model is generated, who owns the content, where the data is coming from, nobody knows where the data is coming from. The data is just pulled in from different sources, and it is there just, and then who owns whichever content, and then that can also pose a threat to intellectual property. And then directive will state that it's unable to provide the correct answer. So it does give you what has been stored either from various sources such as databases, APIs, social media websites, but that doesn't actually mean that the data is actually being produced is 100%. These are concerns that cybersecurity experts have that can actually go within generative AI environment. All right, next slide, please. Okay, the ethical standards and principles are things that basic conformity that actually have to be put in place for any generative AI. It's actually put in place. We talk about reliability, fairness, transparency, responsibility, and I will mention accountability. And this will ensure that you have less bias, you have less loss of good quotes, you have less of security threats, you have less of security breaches as we go on and then we implement AI tools without endangering the cyberspace. Because the cyberspace for everybody and not just for a specific set of persons. Can I have the next slide, please? Okay. This is a typical design model and the development architecture for generative AI. We start from the ambition to the design, to the validation. We talk about design to production. We also have the deployment phase, and then we have the monitoring and maintenance. This is just a base model architecture for a lot of enterprises implementing the generative AI, and this has been used for quite some time. And though we have other concerns, and then I think I'll just go to the next slide and I'll just recap it together when I'm doing my our base recommendation. Next slide, please. Okay. Yeah, we have different cyber risks, which are main cyber risks that we could actually have. It starts from data poisoning. A specific set of training data can actually be poisoned if there's no work done. We also have misinformation. We have deep fakes where people are trying to use different places to create videos, and it's already a major concern and not a major cyber risk as we speak right now. We have the orcs news, political, we have the organizers at scale. It's easy for someone to actually go through and get to see everything about an organization by using a prompt engineering. And then we have the prompt injection, and then yeah, we have the major one that is going all out for a lot of organizations right now, which is AI malware. The specific one we are still concerned about is the one GPT. And these are just main cyber risks that we've identified quite important. All right. Can I have the next slide? All right. So generative AI and then the recommendation. We talk about generative AI is often patched together by a network of very different filters, which even within data, which makes it hard to achieve the levels of accountability, reliability, and security needed for ethical AI, which is one of the five main ethical standards for creating any generative AI environment. So to become truly secure, we need a unified approach, so that is ISO 27032, which is the 2323 version, which is version 2, precisely to secure the entire lifespan of the AI system. Security measures need to be implemented in every step of the development cycle to ensure that sensitive data is accurate, stored, and used securely. We should be sure because whatever you put into data storage is what comes out, and then from there, that is what is actually given out via prompt engineering. And if the data that it's being doled out is not accurate, definitely we have uh, hallucination of data. And so data is accurate, stored, and used securely. These measures include data encryption, locating system vulnerabilities, and even case malicious attacks on breaches. All right, next slide. Okay, yeah. So earlier I mentioned like generative AI, like in base model architecture. We actually recommend at I4 export that a lot of all this has to be put into consideration for base enterprise AI. So from stage 1 to stage 2, what threat modeling is actually involved, and then change path analysis to data has been implemented, which will also revolve around ISO 27032 standards. And then we have the design of model, the LLM code reviews, which is the large language model code reviews. I will talk about vulnerability scanning within each code and vulnerability scanning within each environment. And then stage 3, we talk about data validation, the feedback stage, and then how do you make the hyperparameter to me, and then the access and configuration management. Let's talk about design to production. So within design to production and deployment, we have chaos engineering, how do you manage if there's anything that actually goes on between the production and deployment. And we have the pen testing approach to ensure that we have best practice standard, and then like I said, the multi framework infrastructure is what we actually ensure that we get the very best out of generative AI. And then same vulnerability and monitoring will actually also assist in the monitoring and maintenance of our generative AI, which is to ensure this ongoing success of generative AI system. Right. Next slide, and I think that'll be thank you from me for your time, and it's been a pleasure speaking to everybody. I believe we've been informed a bit about generative AI and ISO 27032. I think I'll give Lucas the honor to justice to Thank you.
Thank you, Aikin. So let's move on to the ISO section. So the main question that we want to ask, what we want to answer now is, what do AI and ISO 27032 have in common? And I know that maybe this is not the well-known standard like others, like the 9001 and the 14,000 of the 27001, but that does not necessarily make it less important. So today I bring you some insights about the standard. It's mainly based on my participation as an expert on ISO's SC27 committee. These were experts share ideas, comments, views, and also the voting of the new publication of the standards. I was appointed by Argentina to the ISO 27032 working group, where the standard has suffered major changes. So it was a little bit outdated. The last version was from 2012, that was 11 years ago, and the new version was published just last month, so June 2023, and we're going to talk about this new standard. So there's differences within the scope of the two standards, the 2012 version and the 2023, on the objectives and also on the controls that are more related to the risk, also to cover the risk that Aiken mentioned about deep fakes, fake news, and what could possibly happen or what could possibly go wrong with AI. So what are we going to discuss here is going to be a brief intro to the new standard. We're going to compare it against the ISO 27001. So there is, of course, a reference mapping between these two standards because they are really coming common and aligned. And also we are compare against the previous version, the 2012 version, so to see what's new in the standard. So to start a little bit, the title of the standard is Cybersecurity Guidelines for Internet Security. So you see that the scope is the guidelines, but for a niche of information security, that is Internet security. So a subset of cybersecurity. So we are focusing only on Internet security. Than the previous version was focusing most on cybersecurity as a broad. So here we focus only on Internet security. That's a portion of cybersecurity. And the main idea is to focus on addressing Internet security issues and common threats that could be, for instance, social engineering attacks, zero-day attacks, privacy attacks, hacking, maybe proliferation of malware, and so on. And also to focus on the preservation of confidentiality, integrity, and availability, and other properties that could be, for instance, authenticity, accountability, non-repudiation, and reliability. All those properties are always mentioned on ISO 27001 and all the ISOs related to that. So those are the main properties we want to protect here. It also provides technical and non-technical controls to address Internet security risks, including controls for preparing for attacks, preventing attacks, detecting and monitoring attacks, and also responding to attacks. So this gives you an idea of the 5 areas also related to NIST CSF. So the identify, protect, monitoring, respond, and recover. So there are controls for all those areas within the new version of the standard. That's an improvement from the other one. Also, it provides guidance for Internet security governance. So what are the policies, what are the roles, the responsibilities, information flows, not only within an organization. This is more focused on the environment, on how the different users on the Internet collaborate with each other, how are the information security vulnerabilities from one benefit or not generate a vulnerability for others, also on the ecosystem as a whole. So see it as that, as the ecosystem, not only on an organization alone. So it also combines several information international standards and uses existing concepts from 27001, 02, 27033, that's the network security, and 27701, that's the one related to privacy information management systems, so also strongly related to the 27001. So the main idea here is to provide a relationship between Internet security, web security, network security, and cybersecurity. Obviously, focus on Internet security. So giving controls for that, addressing cybersecurity readiness also, but for Internet-facing systems. So we're focusing on there. Also identifying interesting parties and describing the roles within Internet security. Okay, perfect. So here there is this is a section of the standard, it's a diagram that is within the standard. The idea is to define what are the main things that the standard is talking about. So cybersecurity, we have the definition there, but the main idea is to manage information security risks when the information is in a digital form. So we are only focusing when it is a digital form, in computers, storage, or networks, and so on. It also deals with protected internet connecting systems, could be hardware, software, programs, and data from potential attacks. And mostly threats can be internet-based or due to connectivity to other network systems within the organization or a customer or provider's network. So C of these more focusing on attacks coming from the internet or connected or connections to the internet. And then we go to internet security. Here is the preservation of the CIA of information over the internet, and also all the properties we talked before: authenticity, accountability, non-repudiation, and reliability. Also, if you need a little bit more information on the definition of this, you can go to the ISO 27000 with the definitions. Then it also talks about internet security being concerned with protected internet-related services and related ICT systems and networks as an extension of network security. So it's also focused apart, as you see on the diagram, as a part of the network securities. So it concerns all web security and it concerns part of network security, not as a whole. Because if we go to the definition of network security, we see that it covers all kind of networks that exist in an organization, could be from local area networks, WANs, personal area networks, and wireless networks. So it goes a little bit beyond the scope of the standard. It's only internet security. So this is only to have a little bit in mind of what are we talking about, what are the definitions, and so on. So going forward, and also in one of the clauses, clause 7, there is a mention and a listing, a detail of the interested parties. And the main thing here, the main objective of what we want to communicate is that there is a complexity that arises here from the fact that all interested parties, even when they are not malicious, have a different view on their needs, on the requirements, and the threats. They're completely different. So they have a different list of risks and controls that they have to counter, no? They have to treat and risk and treat. This means that there is no one-size-fits-all solution. So we will have controls here in the standard. It's up to each organization to see how they implement it, what's the level of risk that they want to address, what's the level of willingness of risk they want to, let's say, accept. So that's the main objective here and what the ISO standard wants to communicate. So we have different interested parties. We have the users, that could be organizations, public or private. Could be any individual that have access to the internet or any services available on the internet. Like, for example, a buyer or a seller or a content contributor, a gamer, a web surfer, and so on. The important here is that organizations must extend their corporate responsibilities to the internet. So they should proactively ensure that the practices and actions in the internet do not introduce further security risks to other internet users communities. That's why we're talking about the ecosystem and not just a user or just an organization that, for instance, ISO 27001 would look out. On this standard 27042 goes more for the ecosystem of what's going on there, what the interactions, and so on. Then we have other interested parties, could be the coordinator and standardization organizations. For instance, ICANN, IATF, and W3C, they develop technical standards on the use of the internet and the service providers and the services provided by service providers. So they're more of having technical approaches of how should things be done, guidelines, and so on. And then we have the government authorities. And these are really important because they hold information not only on national security, maybe military, intelligence, but also a lot of information of individuals and organizations and society as a whole. So, and that's one of the main roles of government, but they also have another role that they need to protect their own country's infrastructure and information, and not only their own country, but if you look at the EU, it's also other member states that join together and try to protect their own shared infrastructure. And they also play a role in the coordination between law enforcement agencies when an incident happens. They are the primary coordinator for disseminating information when, in times of crisis, when some security incident or there's a cyber attack, mainly to the nation or to an important organization, an important sector of the nation. It also includes authorities like CERTs that are mainly sometimes also within government organizations, and they also mandate an important part of the education program for universities and high schools that have let's say the ability of forming the next cybersecurity profession. So they have a really important role in the ecosystem as a whole. Then we also have the law enforcement agencies that enforce the regulations and hold all interested parties accountable. Those regulations also performed by the government. Then the ISPs, the internet service providers that provides access to the internet for employees, partners, users, and so on. And then we have to ask the question if it's legally or not, if they have if they have the authorizations, could the ISP warn their customers when they discover threat patterns? Do they have the ability to do that? Can they legally do that? Applying to regulations, can we set an agreement to do that, and so on? Could they look for dangerous transfers over the internet and give the tip to the users, governments, or law enforcement agencies? That's another question that we have there for those interesting parties. Okay. So also going to another section of the standard, it talks a lot about internet security risk assessment and treatment. That's clause 8 of the standard. And this is essential because we need to identify potential risk early on, and not only for other risks, but also focusing on AI and developing appropriate treatment strategies for risk and AI, what AI systems connect to the internet. If they are not connected to the internet, other things could also go wrong, unrelated and so on, but mainly focusing on the internet connected ones. So this relies on ISO 31000 and ISO 27005. The other one more focused on information security risk, the last one. And here we need to address risk management in the context of the internet. Remember that we are talking about internet security. And it's the responsibility of the interested parties to do it, to define their approach for risk management, what is the risk appetite, what are the controls they want to implement. But it's not only an individual responsibility, because there's also a shared one, to achieve a coherent level of security of the ecosystem as a whole. So in that case, we need to consider the relevant threats and the relevant vulnerabilities, as we see in the slide, that could be linked with internet security issues, so that we can select controls based on our limited resources, based on limited resources of each interested party, and to also increase the maturity not only of each interested party, but also of the ecosystem as a whole. Then we need to understand who are the threat actors, who are the threat agents, those individuals or group of individuals that could have any role on the execution or support of an attack. And why is this important? Because by understanding the motives, could be religious, political, economic, what capabilities they have, knowledge, funding, size, what are their intentions? Do they want to also only have fun? Do they want to commit a crime? Do they want to commit espionage on their target? This is critical for the assessment of the risk and in the development of the implementation of the controls, because we're not going to treat a threat that is a nation state the same as a hacktivist or as a malicious insider, and so on. And here I'm not only talking about threats to personal identifying information, but also deliberate modification of proprietary information, but mainly threats to the infrastructure that supports the internet. So a little bit more important or critical and related to that. Also to the creation of fake information, hoaxes at a large scale, and even those kind of threats of attacks that could be perpetrated by advanced persistent threats. So we are trying to level up a little bit more on the standard and on the focus of the standard. Okay, so we also talk about vulnerabilities, zero-day vulnerabilities, deployment of patches, and so on. But another important thing is the attack vector. So what's an attack vector? It's a path or a means by which an attacker can gain access to a computer or a network server. So we're talking about gaining access in an unauthorized way within the internet security scope, An attack can occur on a singular attack vector or carried out as a blended attack, using various attack vectors. Some examples of this attack vector could be suspicious websites, zero-day exploitation, maybe peer-to-peer applications, and also IoT devices could act as an additional attack vector. And the attacker does not always use the same attack vector. That's the main thing here. It uses multiple vectors and changes them frequently. So we need to be sure of what's going on there in order to assess the risk mainly. And in order to, maybe they're going to be using different tactics, techniques, and procedures to attack AI systems connecting to their internet than other type of systems. Okay, perfect. So comparing the ISO 27032 against the ISO 27001, the audience is totally different. The 27032 is more overarching, not only focusing on organizations or the group of companies or only their supply chain. It's talking about the whole ecosystem. The whole ecosystem is a target here. Then the objectives are different. This is not for certification or increasing the maturity of the internal information security, but more for fostering maturity of internet security, knowledge of interested parties, some ways we can increase security of the ecosystem as a whole, and so on. So also the scope is different. This is not information security. It's a subset of information security. We're talking about internet security. And also the type of frameworks. Mostly related, both could be considered program frameworks, although the new version of the 2732 has less mappings and technical reference that is predecessor. So that's another thing we are going to talk about. Okay, perfect. So in a comparison, 27032 version 2023 against 2012, the previous version more than 10 years ago. So the main thing here is that there is a less focus on the cybersecurity space. The scope has been decreased to internet security. The sections describing the nature of cyberspace, the nature of cybersecurity have been taken out. Also, there's less focus on collaboration. The previous version offered a framework for information sharing, coordination, incident handling, processes for collaboration, information exchange, sharing, and so on. But these key elements can be taken out of the standard. Also, we talk about the scopes reduction. There's also an enhancement in the interested parties. We're going to talk a little bit more on another slide, so that has been improved. And also some improved recommendations on the control section. We're going to talk about also on another slide, but the controls were really reduced, and now they have been increased and more than double and triple the amount of controls. Okay, perfect. So going to each of the differences, we have here the title is totally different. In the previous version, it was information technology, security techniques. Now we go to guidelines for internet security. So that's the main of the title. Then for the definition of cybersecurity here, see that they talk about cyberspace on the previous version. Here they're going more for addressing cyber risks, although there's a notion of only on the digital form, as you see on the second sentence of the 2023 version. So we're still talking about cybersecurity, but more going on the internet security side, on the digital part side. Okay, perfect. So on the scope, what are the main differences? See on the left-hand side in the 2012 version, there was a mention of critical information infrastructure protection being in scope. Here on the new version, we have mentioned that this document does not specifically address these controls for system, and that's the main idea, but it can be used, but it not particularly addresses. That's the main difference on the scope from the previous 2DR one. Also the guidance on improving the state of cybersecurity, and here is the guidance for internet security, as we already described. Then, this is one of the main changes. So the same graph was included in both versions. We see that cybersecurity is just on the left side, it's just a small part. Here, cybersecurity has been enlarged as it covers everything: internet security, network security, and web security, and so on. Then information security is not mentioned here, critical information infrastructure protection also, and so on, as you see the main difference there. So we are focusing on internet security being as part of cybersecurity. That's I think that one of the main changes here on the scope and how they establish the definition of the different sections. Good. Then the interesting part is there were only 2 on the previous version. Now we have 5, as we saw and we described earlier. So that's the main change here. They were denominated stakeholders before, now they are denominated as interesting parties. Then related to the controls, there were 6 controls before. Here we have them, and see that they are not mostly focused on the 5 functions that we described before. Now, yes, we have 17 controls, and they're more focusing on not only preventing something from happening, but also detecting and recovering and respond to that. So see the main philosophical difference and the approach on the controls that are being implemented. Okay, so to talk a little bit more about how we can address Gen AI risks with ISO 27032. We have 17 controls. That's up to the organization to see how to implement them, what's the risk appetite, and so on. But as we see, we can divide this into 2 main things: the protection and the identification, but on the technical and on the GRC side, the governance, risk, and compliance, more the non-technical side. No? And here we can mention the important ones of the controls, that is awareness and training. This can help in recognizing and mitigating the potential risks associated with generative AI. Also, incident response is essential in the event of a cybersecurity breach caused by a generative AI-based attack. or being a Gen AI system being attacked. And the planning before it happens, we need to know what to do. So in case of an incident, so it's going to be different if we have a Gen AI attack. It's going to be more challenging to address this. Are we going to have a specific playbook for that? How are we going to detect that, and so on. Then to address legislations related to the EU AI Act that Kristen mentioned before, also privacy protection of PAI being processed or not, or being attacked by AI, and then asset management to assess if any sensitive data is being processed or used by AI. And then we have on the right another set of controls that are more to go into the detect, recover, and respond. I know this is oversimplification of the controls. There's not much time to talk about all of them, but we see there is the 5 functions being addressed. One could also make the question that maybe there's an imbalance between the 5 functions, but that's a thing that each organization has to address on its own. And mainly because of that, I think we need to combine the ISO 27032 with other frameworks. So I don't think the answer is only focusing on the ISO 27032. It could be the, let's say, the cornerstone. It could be the main launching of our approach for Gen AI risks, but we also have to complement with other frameworks. And that's why we need to take an overarching approach. That's why we need an interdisciplinary approach also, and collaborate with other interesting parties. So we need to assess the Gen AI impact on cybersecurity. Each organization will assess the risk in consideration to the threats they have and their own assets and their own threat landscape, and also the ecosystem they're in and the maturity of it. This will lead to the selection of controls that will help them reduce to an acceptable level and increase the ecosystem maturity, but it's more of an individual but also ecosystem approach. Good, perfect. And then we need to, as I mentioned, combine several frameworks, combine several best practices, and that's why I brought to you on the next slide PwC's responsible AI framework. And from here, I'm not saying we have to implement every single framework or standard, but by implementing ISO 27032 and combining the implementation with some of PwC's framework, for instance, the part of data and AI ethics, or the interpretability and explainability, the sustainability, also the bias and the fairness that are not directly addressed on ISO 27032, we can have a complete and overarching approach to cyber AI risks. Also on the safety for physical kind of systems, AI systems that have access to physical, let's say, mechanisms or parts. And then I think one of the important things is the problem formulation. So does this problem warrant an AI or an ML solution because of the hype that AI is having and so on? That's another important thing of this framework, and the validation, no, the continuous improvement based on the feedback. Okay. And then also Kirsten talked a lot about the EU AI Act, but the main thing that I want you to communicate is not only based on ISO, take ISO as the main step to launch your cyber Gen AI cyber risk management framework, combine it with other frameworks, but also take into consideration legislation. We know it is in a draft format, this EU AI Act, but also take into consideration data. Do a risk assessment of your AI systems, of you're gonna plan to purchase something related to the system and so on, to take a whole holistic view of this. Okay, and that's all what I wanted to mention about ISO 27032 and its new version. We have a little bit of time if you want to do any questions via chat and so on. Don't worry if you want to interact.
Yes, okay, thanks a lot, Lucas, Akin, and also Christian for delivering this very informative webinar. Just to remind you that PCB offers training and certification courses, which will show your dedication in managing data protection frameworks as well as cybersecurity. And most importantly, you will get recognized worldwide. Now, without further ado, we'll go ahead and answer some of the questions from the attendees. One of the question is, hi, just curious on the ISO 27032 previous version versus the current one? I know that there has been an increase in the number of controls. Are the new controls building off the old controls, or is it a totally new set of controls?
No, they're building up. There are some, let's say, increase in scope of the controls, but they're building up. There are controls that have been taken, have been expanded, have been added more detail. So if you compare the previous version, the extent and the length of the controls, there were a few pages. But if you see on the new version, there's a lot of content. There's a lot of controls and there's a lot of focus on there. So what I think is they can build it up on the controls, they have extended the scope, and they have added new things there. So I'm pretty, let's say, good. I think it's a pretty good enhancement and update of the standard, yes.
Okay, thanks, Lucas. Another question is, any recommendations for risk assessment process practices to categorize AI systems in compliance with the EU AI Act?
Okay, perfect. I know, 18, if you want to intervene also, but I think there are already some frameworks out there, not specifically for the EU AI Act. I think formalized yet because it's in a draft format. They will come, but for instance, we have been working with the NIST AI risk framework that has been published, I think, this year. So there are things coming up. You can look up that. And for sure there will be something on the EU coming on, but I think mainly we have to wait and see what they come on. Mainly when the EU AI Act is published and not in a draft format, there will be a lot of frameworks. For now, the main one I'm working on is the NIST one that I can recommend.
Okay, we have a question for Akin. Hi, Akin. What controls can we put in place for the risks arising from AI?
So I think, Lucas, can you just help me scroll to the last slide before your presentation? I tried to stress that if we have, am I audible? Lucas,
Sorry?
let me scroll to the last, my
Yes.
last slide before your presentation. Yeah.
Of your presentation?
Yes, just page,
Just give me 1 second.
yeah, okay, that's page 29.
This one.
All right. Yes, thank you very much. If you look through this, the person that asked the question, if you look at the first thing is from the ideation stage, as a cybersecurity expert, we ensure that you don't have to actually finish up the process of creating and developing a full AI skill before you start implementing cybersecurity standards. For example, Luke has mentioned something about the different controls that has been implemented in 2022. From translating from 6 controls to 17 controls. Some of this and most of these controls are still within the IPDR methodology. So if you look at the IPDR methodology, it will still give you an holistic view of securing development stage even before production stage. You don't actually start securing an application, an AI application or whatever enterprise AI at the end of deployment. You start before and then you go through best practices, and just like Luke has mentioned, to you look at the overarching technologies so that you have more than enough frameworks to look through. I was mentioning ELISA, we have the NIST, we have the IHSM framework, which you can actually still work with. But if you look at the industry still determines most of the standards and controls, aside policies and procedures that are used to implement security within your AI application. Thank you.
Okay, thanks a lot, Akin. And the last question for today, one of the slide titles, ISO 27032-2023, having diagram shows that information security is part of cybersecurity. My question is for Mr. Lucas. Don't you think that cybersecurity is part of information security? I mean, information security is superset and cybersecurity is subset of it.
Yes, exactly. Yes, I think cybersecurity is a subset of information security. Let me go to the graphs so we can. I think cybersecurity is a subset of information security as it's defined in other ISO standards also and in the definitions. Why mainly cybersecurity is more focused on the digital form, and information security goes not only on the digital form of information but also on the physical. If you have a report that you can touch with your hands, printed paper, a conversation being done in a meeting, or sensitive information on a whiteboard, that's concerned by information security, but not by cybersecurity. And I think that that's correct, what they mentioned. And that's why I think they have done some corrections to the new version of the standard to make it a little more clarifying, to make it more easy. However, they don't mention information security on the new graph, so it can give you a few of the doubts. Yes, and I think it's correct.
Okay, thanks one more time for joining us today, and thanks to everyone that joined us in this webinar. Just be informed that this session is recorded and it will be posted on our website and YouTube channel, along with the slides of the presentation. Thanks to all of you one more time, and hope to have you in future webinars as well.
Thank you.
Thank you.